Right. Hey, welcome everybody. Jason here with the Profitable Manufacturer, episode 2. And I will be flying solo today, probably for the next week or two, and it will be out away. And so today I have a special guest, Mark Coudray, somebody who I've known for about 2-3 years now, and somebody who's very knowledgeable, profitability, business, serial entrepreneur, worked with I don't know, probably in the thousands, if I remember correctly now, business coaching and things. And so today we're going to talk about obviously profitability in manufacturing, but we'll dive into some details of how that can be applied and ways to think about making your business, manufacturing business, profitable things. So we're going to dive right in because we have a lot to talk about today. Mark's super knowledgeable and we won't have enough time to get over everything. So we can start out with first a little bit, Mark, about yourself, and then we can dive into profitability.
Well, this is my 50th year in business with my first startup that I started when I was 19. So that was way back in the last century. And I built multiple companies. All of them have been bootstrapped. All of them have been self-financed. I've been through the ups and the downs, and most of what I started off in a manufacturing environment, so I understand that. I was trained specifically in the old school way of accounting and cost accounting, so I have all of that perspective to bring forward, and we're going to really explore that a little bit, hopefully today, because the world we live in today is not the world of cost manufacturing that was being taught in school when I was going to school, and I'm not even sure that they've changed it much today, but we certainly live in a different economy today. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about what it takes to be successful as a manufacturer in the United States today. There's so much pressure on outsourcing and offshore production, nearshore production, that it makes it very, very difficult to be successful. But it's definitely possible, and especially with the interruptions that we've seen coming out of post-COVID, supply chain interruptions, the need to bring things back onshore, this is a really great time to take a look at some of these elements that are affecting the profitability of manufacturers today.
Great. Yeah, like I said, we'll have a lot to talk about. And one other thing that you uniquely bring to the discussion is how to think about things, than getting caught along with what's going on popularly or in the broader biosphere of business these days. So maybe let's start out real quick with just what our show is about, which is profitability. Let's set the table with what's profitability, what does it really mean, and how do we know what we're profitable? What is profit really about?
Well, profitability in the broadest sense of the term is the excess of revenue or capital over expenses. And, we know that from Profit First, the traditional approach to accounting is sales minus expenses equals profit. But the Profit First approach is sales minus profit equals your expenses. What this does is it focuses you on trying to understand expense behavior in a new way. My experience for the first 40 years in business using the traditional cost accounting approaches that are taught to all accountants and all bookkeepers is that when you're focusing on the profit after expenses, you minimize the ability to generate profit. So you typically find companies that are focusing on traditional accounting methods to be sub 10% is very, very common. And they just don't understand why they're ending up in that. Manufacturers especially, because standard accounting is focused on things like budgeted hourly rates and the recovery of your cost over an hour of production time. And machine utilizations and efficiencies within the factory that you're working in. The problem with all of that is that those efficiency numbers and those utilization numbers are a guess, and they change continuously. So if you think that your manufacturing time is 80% or 90% or 95%, and you're anything less than the target amount, all of your cost data is off. And as a result of it being off, you're understating the recovery of those costs. And as a result, that comes out of the profit. That's why there's no profit left. I came to this realization in 2002 with my own company. We were super tight in terms of understanding our costs and understanding where things were and budgets and everything. And we were typically running between 4% and 6% net profit on any given month. Very, very consistent year over year. And I could see that no matter how careful we were was highly unlikely we were ever going to get to 10% or more. So I changed the way that I started looking at profit. And this was way before Profit First ever presented itself. And the way that I changed that was to look at profit recovery as it was happening. I realized that if we looked at our expenses as total cost, in other words, anything that we had to write a check for or anything that we had to pay for was a cost or an expense. So we couldn't generate any profit until all of our total costs were met. So this business of allocating a certain amount per hour as cost recovery or to determine what your hourly billing rate was based on the expenses, that didn't make any sense. So what we started doing is we started breaking our cost up, our cost structures apart, and saying to ourselves, okay, the big rocks, so to speak, within the picture were our labor cost and our material cost. So if we were making something, the biggest single cost of good was the raw material cost that we were working with, whether we were converting metal to a part or whether we were printing paper or whatever we were doing. We were taking material and we were changing it into something that had higher value. And the difference between that cost and the sales price was very confusing, because you would go into the accounting books and some would call it gross margin and some would call it contribution margin and some would call it gross profit. And there was all of these different names for the same thing. So we started looking at it from a type of perspective called activity-based accounting. And this is a non-traditional approach to accounting. It's not GAAP approved or anything like that. But what it does is it looks at where the activity occurs and how the revenue is applied. And what we realized is that all of the money, 100% of the money in Profit First, we call this OPEX, right? The operating margin. In traditional activity-based accounting, they call this contribution margin. And the name comes from all of the money that contributes to paying your expenses or your total expense. And the realization that we had was that you cannot generate any profit until your total costs are met. And with the standard cost accounting and the budgeted hourly rate approach that they teach in school, as I looked at it and as I analyzed it within my own businesses, we were hitting our break even sometimes at noon on the last day of the month, which means that we only had 4 hours in an entire month to generate our profit for the month. And as soon as I started realizing at what day of the month we recovered our total cost, that changed everything. And within 60 days of changing that view, our profitability went from 4 to 6% to 25 to 33% on top line sales. It was a monumental change. And what we did with that is we recognized that the work that we were doing and the types of business that we were doing was not uniform. It varied tremendously. And the best way that I can describe this that everyone will understand is that if you've ever sent an overnight letter with UPS or FedEx and you wanted it delivered in the morning the next day, that letter could cost anywhere from $100 to $200 to get it delivered. If you wanted to deliver it the next day before the end of business, then the price to deliver it might be $35 to $60. If it was 2-day delivery, it might be $9 to $20. And if it was standard surface delivery, it might be $6 to $9. The same delivery, the same channels, the same trucking, the same aircraft, the same routing, the same management. The only difference was the proximity of time. So the time value became a huge focus for us. And so what we began doing was categorizing our work based on the sensitivity of time. So if the client wanted it to deliver the next day, we would charge them more to move them to the front. We recognized that immediate delivery had more value than delivery over a longer period of time. So we created the next day morning delivery, then the next day delivery, the 2-day delivery, and the regular delivery as 3 different models. And we gave the client the option to choose what they wanted. And that extra time on the long delivery, the 3 to 5 day delivery, typically, that gave us the buffer to move jobs around and put the higher paying work at the beginning of the month. Now, what this did is this depressed our break even. In the very first month we did it, we went from day 20 on a 21-day month to day 16 on a 21-day month. And that was mind-blowing to see that. And then when we started promoting this preferential concierge type service, we were able to drop the break even to day 11. 100% of the margin after that total cost recovery drops directly to the bottom line. And this was incredibly enlightening to us. Huge discovery.
Yeah, it's rethinking being intentional. And if you don't put the offer out there, then you aren't going to know if it, and time and service are very important to many of our customers. So we should put that out there, not value the product just by itself, but the experience and then also the time sensitivity based on what their needs are.
And, this is a really key point, Jason, is that we are so sensitive to the commoditization of the work that we do. Every industry has been commoditized. Every supplier, every client is always throwing out that, well, we could take it offshore, we could take it near shore, we can do this, we can do that. And the reality is that's mostly hollow. We capitulate, we bail on that position, we cave on that position. And really what we say is, how important is fast delivery to you? If you want to take it offshore, you're going to wait anywhere from 3 weeks, maybe 10 days if you air freight it in, to up to 15 weeks on a normal standardized delivery. Now, if we take a look at the risk factor involved with waiting 12 to 15 weeks for delivery, all we've got to do is watch what happened during COVID when that surface transportation and that ocean transportation was interrupted, and it changed everything. The demand changed, the output for the product changed, the ability to produce your product because you were missing sub-assemblies and different parts that were coming from different manufacturers. Everything literally broke down. And this created a huge level of awareness for the time value of proximity, to being close to your market and being able to respond. And what we found was that when we offered different levels of service, the client would make the choice for themselves. We were not making the choice because we were caving to a threat. The client was saying, yeah, I need it tomorrow. I know it's going to be expensive, but I've got to have it. My whole plant's going to be shut down. I've got finished product except for this controller part that you make. So you got finished product waiting for just one part. Ford had 150,000 F100, F-150 pickups waiting for a chip, completely finished, except waiting for a chip that would allow them to drive the truck off the storage facility. So that just literally put a laser focus on the importance of what we can do once we understand the value of time in our ability to respond.
Right. The other thing you kind of pointed out was the being intentional and understanding the inputs of data and the quality of that. It's something I talk about a lot with our clients. Is you can come up with a KPI, you can come up with something you're going to try to measure, but if that quality of data isn't consistent, it's going to mislead you as well.
Well, and this is a really, really excellent point, because the cleanliness and the order of the data has become a huge focus. Just since November, the end of November, it seems like everybody's talking about AI and Chat GPT, and it's on everybody's radar. We've been involved with machine learning and data science and all of this since 2015, 2016, kind of the dark ages when it was really hard to do. And part of the issue is that the traditional approach to cost recovery and data is relational data, tabular data. It's in a spreadsheet, it's in an Excel spreadsheet, a Google sheet, it's rows and columns. That's called ordered data. And if that data is not prepared in an orderly way, then we've got to create these very convoluted extraction methods with SQL and other types of data programming languages, which were very hard to do and very prone for error. Now what's happening is that we're moving into the world of unstructured data, where we're acquiring data in an unformatted role. And this is called NoSQL, is one form of doing this. But being able to identify with machine learning, with different types of algorithms, what we need, and with the addition of the GPT models, which stand for Generalized Pre-trained Transformers, we can utilize the principles of augmented artificial intelligence. I don't like artificial intelligence. I prefer augmented intelligence, to literally look for the patterns in the data and then extract those patterns, apply meaning to it, which is what goes through the pre-trained form, and transform it into something that's useful for us. And in the GPT model, that transformation is the query that comes in the form of the prompt that we're asking for. So the better the prompt, the better the structure of that prompt. It's like garbage in, garbage out. If we have a good query and we can structure and give the training model examples of what we want, we can get very, very good data very quickly. In fact, I was just doing this right before the call today. I was creating a series of what are called chain prompts that identify from our existing data the characteristics of our ideal client profile, and then using a two-step process of saying, provide me the contact information of the following clients or the following customers. And then I would use that and say, create a lookalike audience of similar companies within a 100-mile radius of zip code 12345, and list the contact information of those companies. So it's looking for the similarities of those companies, and then it's pulling from the data that's on Google or Bing or whatever, wherever it's using for location data or whatever database it's pulling from. And then it's giving me a list of similar companies that have the characteristics of these particular examples. So giving it an example is kind of like pre-training it or fine-tuning it to give me more of what I want. And we can do the same thing within our manufacturing data to determine what runs fastest, our feed rates, our setup times, what kinds of jobs that are give us the highest marginal hourly rate. So the contribution margin divided by hours gives us a dollar per hour or a marginal value per hour. And we can go in and categorize all of the work and start developing patterns around what works really, really well, so we can sell that kind of work to maximize our profitability.
Right. Yeah. And this also kind of points out the value of asking the right questions and queries and things as well. Because like we talked about earlier, the quality of the data is important, but if you don't ask the right questions, or your questions aren't getting down to the essentials of the issue or the challenge, then you could also put yourself in the wrong direction as well.
This has been the single biggest issue with structured data. If you can't ask the right question, you can't get the right answer, right? So it's you don't know what you don't know. But this is the beauty of AI, is that when you start asking it questions based on specific patterns, and you use a type of data analysis that's called graph data or knowledge graphing, what you're doing is you're creating clusters of data points. And what the AI can do is to say, kind of like as a kid, we used to do those dot to dot pictures where they'd have the dots and the numbers and we'd have to connect them and they'd form a picture at the end. Well, what the AI does is, what AI is really powerful with is that it's looking for patterns. And from the patterns, it's connecting pattern behavior. So essentially, it's taking clusters of data and it's saying, oh, there's a void between this. This is what should be in that void. So it's literally bringing to your attention the unseen or the unknown. And this is what I do, is I help build competitive uniqueness for companies. No matter how commoditized or how price-driven your market, I've found at least 24 different ways to make a company unique, no matter how much competition they've got, on multiple levels. And so when you do that and you present it to a client, the most common response is, wow, I never would have thought of that, but it makes perfect sense. And when you've done that, you've hit a home run, because that's going to give you a competitive advantage in the marketplace that none of your competitors have got. And we can build durability and longevity to that advantage as well.
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me of responses I often get with working with clients and implementing Profit First is, okay, that makes sense. Why didn't I think of it before? Is even some of the comments when first start working with them.
The best example I can give is, it's hiding in plain sight. We're just not looking at it the right way.
Right. So maybe let's shift over. We may have covered it just a little bit earlier, but we want to talk also about custom versus standard manufacturing.
Right.
How it can apply in not only Profit First method, but profitability in general.
Yeah, this is really, really relevant, because the industrial economy that I was trained in back in the day, right, and where many cost accounting models are still doing today, it's based on standard manufacturing. And standard manufacturing is, if you're making 2 million yards of paper, or you're making 10 million paper clips, or 10 million 3/8 by 2-inch screws, you're doing the same thing over and over 24/7. That's standard manufacturing. You're making a standardized part. This was the fundamental foundation of the industrial age, was the ability to create standardized parts. The industrial world was based on creating big factories that were very expensive, that would turn out mass manufactured parts. And those parts would be used in many different things. This is where ASTM and ANSI and all of the standardization, NIST, the NIST, all of these standard industrial models were developed around standard manufacturing. Well, something happened in the last century. It was called digital. And in the digital world, it's a unit of one. If we're addressing design in a digital component, whether it's digital color, whether it's digital manufacturing, whether it's 3D printing, we're converting everything into numbers, and then we're instructing the machines to create a part based on those specifications. The digital world is a unit of one. The industrial world is a unit of many. So we're moving from a unit of many to a unit of one. And in the process, all of our control and management mechanisms are breaking down. This is why we need AI. This is why we need the ability to understand behaviors under different types of parameters. The ability to eliminate setup. A huge part of the work that I'm doing right now is to try and understand the concept of value. And value is what your customer is willing to pay for. We've already talked about the value of speed, right? So on the top part of the equation, we've got the value the client is willing to pay for times the probability of that outcome. What's the likelihood they're going to get it? Like in an hour. Well, the ability to call somebody up and say, I need a custom part manufactured. I only need one of it. Can I come by in an hour? The probability is less than 50% that you're going to get that in an hour, unless you've made it before. If you've made it before and you've got a queue and you've got the ability to drop it in, then you may be able to do that. But you've got the probability of outcome. And then you've got the bottom part of the equation, which is how fast can you deliver it, and times the friction of that. What kind of hoops do you have to jump through in order to make that happen? Well, now we've got an equation that's a value equation, and we can apply that value equation uniformly based on the time value of what we're delivering. It's a new way to look at it, and it's a derivation. I think some of the people on the call may have been familiar with this and talked about it. I talked about this on a different podcast last week, which is the Hormozi value equation, which came from Alex Hormozi's book of 2021, which was the $100 million offer. Excellent book. And the key takeaway from that entire book, in my estimation, is the Hormozi value formula, because it is, again, one of those pivotal, life-changing perspectives that cause us to question everything that we've ever done.
Right, and our customers are expecting that type of value. They have that knowledge in their mind of they're able to get things on demand in many cases in different product lines and things, and so they're expecting more and more from us, and we need a way to respond, but also, most importantly, to do it profitably as well.
And I think one of the key elements to this, Jason, is that our perspective on the elements of quality or the elements of delivery or the elements of service or the elements of manufacturing and tolerance and all of the different variables that go into this equation, we tend to lump them all together as a commodity. You know, we've got manufacturing tolerance within a certain kind of material. So if you're dealing in a machine environment and you're machining aluminum can hold certain tolerances. They have certain feed rates. They have certain ability to chew through it. And you know what that's going to be. You know what the tolerance is going to be at a certain feed rate and a certain depth of that material. If you switch to something that's really exotic material like Inconel or some of the aerospace components, your manufacturing characteristics completely change. Your feed rates completely change. There's a guy that has really opened the eyes in the machining world. His name is Titan Gilroy, and he's got a podcast called Titans of CNC, and it's phenomenal what he's been able to do with 3D printing combined with traditional manufacturing and sintering and all of these different kinds of things. And his whole approach to manufacturing in a world that's digitally driven by numbers was a blending of manufacturing in the CNC component and then ultimately the additive and subtractive manufacturing approach to it. I think his biggest client is SpaceX. And if you know anything about how SpaceX manufactures the Raptor engines, it is a hybrid model of traditional manufacturing and digital manufacturing.
Yeah, so many changes are going on these days with standardized products that customers are expecting to still maintain those and get the prices that they're used to, with the new like SpaceX and how they're combining these different processes together to deliver even higher, more targeted type of products and things.
Well, and one of the things that really drives me out of my mind is the standard pricing model that's based on a matrix, which is basically your setup time divided by the unit of costs plus your runtime. Now, the runtime is pretty predictable in terms of how things produce, but the setup times and the breakdown times can change radically depending on the tolerances, the materials, everything that you're working with. But the problem is that curve that results from the combination of the amortized setup time plus the runtime, it's a fallacy to think that, the unit cost that you want, you got to buy 1,500 units or 1,000 or 2,500 or 5,000 or 10,000. You may only need 1,000, but to get the best price, you're buying 5,000. That's a massive waste of time and resources. And when you really take that out in the printing industry, in the publishing segment of the printing industry, most people don't realize this, but 60% of all books ever produced have never been sold. And the publishers are basing their unit cost on some fictitious run length that ends up in a warehouse that gets sold in the remainder market. And it completely is distorting what the true cost of that product actually is. Print on demand has changed a lot of that.
Right. And it reminds me a lot of how these systems of information like accounting and graphs and things lead to a lot of errors in planning. The supply chain challenges that most of us all faced in the last year and a half, I think are a large part of it were from these miscalculations of demand forecasting and things, and using those models and not adjusting to what's going on in reality.
Again, I'm a thinker. I'm constantly questioning whether the variables that I'm looking at or the equation that I'm looking at, whether it's true. And I can give you a really great example of this, is that years ago, I was working with a client that was selling to Walmart. And, we've all heard Walmart stories of, they're buying it, they want the cheapest price. They don't want the cheapest price at all. What Walmart is interested in is the velocity of sell-through. So it's ROI per square foot per store. So the more accurate the information on the merchandising, the positioning, anything that you can do to maximize the revenue per square foot and minimize the investment to do that is going to make you a hero in their eyes. And this is exactly what we did before big data was even the thing. This was way back in the late 90s, 99, 2000, 2001. We did it with Excel spreadsheets. And essentially, we took something that was super commoditized, a particular product, consumer product, and we started looking at why some stores sold so well and other stores didn't sell very well with that product. And what we realized was the product was incredibly sensitive to the weather. And when we started overlaying a weather database with current weather patterns over the top of the store locations, we could see a direct correlation between how that product sold, right? So think about how much beef stew you're going to sell when it's cold outside versus when it's 100 degrees outside. How much soda pop are you going to sell when it's 100 versus when it's 35, or minus 35? And that was the example of combining multiple data sources and then drawing correlations. And it got to the point where we were able to speed the conversion or the fulfillment based on data that would come in on Sunday night from all the stores nationwide. We had 10 days to deliver the product, and we could get a reasonably good weather forecast 10 days out. And so we could literally predict at the store level what they would need. And we started creating that and measuring that. And what happened was we were able to create a sell-through that was far greater than anything that Walmart had ever seen. And it got to the point where they granted this particular company permission to sell Walmart whatever they thought was the best scenario. And it got to the point where Walmart was sharing the sell-through data of their competitors so they could maximize what was going through. It was a complete turnaround from the buy low, sell high kind of mentality, or in case of Walmart, buy low and continue to sell lower.
Right. And this kind of does bring up a really good point of getting things down to the essential elements of something. And that's something that you and I have talked about in the past. And I think you're fantastic at explaining it in a way of how to get down to those essential elements and that's where I feel profitability lies, when you get down to the essential things and you understand what those essential elements that deliver profitability, efficiencies, and other things that make your business more profitable. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that's a really big thing with me, is I'm constantly coming in as an advisor, as a consultant, as a business coach. I don't do too much consulting anymore. I mostly now do systems design and systems coaching. And essentially, it would drive me nuts when the customers would say, oh, we've never done it that way, or that's not the way we do it here, or, any of those kinds of relying on past behavior as an indicator for future success. That's not the case. So one of the things that I do with all of my clients whenever we're faced with a profitability issue is I say, here's an exercise. You're not going to like it. And the reason that you're not going to like it is because it's going to force you to think about what you do in a completely different way. Imagine I'm the government and I'm come in and said, you can't use that paint. You can't use that solvent. You can't use that machine. You can't use that form of electricity. You can't use that form of fuel. And you've still got to make the product. Now you've got to make the product in a completely new way. And you can't use any of the things that you've normally used. And I'm being kind of facetious about it, but if we look at the world that we live in today, isn't this exactly what's happening around us today? And so this forces us to literally look at everything that we're doing and get creative. And then I give them creative frameworks that we can use that allow them to look at the problem from multiple points of view and multiple perspectives. And oftentimes we can eliminate features and eliminate aspects of the manufacturing that are just irrelevant to the actual end use that we deliver. And this often relates to a completely new reimagining of the work that's being done. And I think in today's world, that's exactly what we have to do. We're short on labor, we're short on time, we're short on everything. So we need to look at the world in a new perspective.
Right. Right. And it also allows us, I think it's a freeing thought as well, or a freeing approach, because then there's a lot less noise we have to pay attention to, or think our minds think we have to pay attention to it. It allows us to ignore much of that, if not all of it.
Well, and you know this, Jason, because we've talked about it, but the listeners don't, is that I reduce every situation, every step of the process down to the elemental level. And the elemental level is, this is an event that takes place at this moment in time. I've eliminated all of this descriptive narrative or the dialogue around whatever I'm doing. Excuse me. And if I can reduce it to an event and a point in time, there's only 3 things that can happen, and 2 of them are bad. We can have a positive outcome, which moves us on to the next step of the process. To have a positive outcome means that we have to have crystal clarity on the ultimate result that we're delivering. So to quote Stephen Covey from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People from way back in the day, begin with the end in mind. Get crystal clear on what we're trying to deliver and make sure that that outcome is the true and right outcome. Minimal resources, minimal time, whatever the requirements are. So that's the positive outcome. The negative outcome is, this just isn't going to work. It's absolutely not going to happen. You can't feed at that rate. You can't convert at this. You can't use this with this substrate, whatever it is. It's an absolute no-go. The third element, which is also considered a negative, is the indeterminate. We need to study this. We need to take it back to committee. We need to get approval. We need to talk to my partner. It needs to go to legal. It needs to be whatever, right? It slows the ultimate decision between a go and a no-go. And that's a negative, because time is the thing that we're trying to eliminate. So by using that process, you've got the ability to look at anything that you're doing and literally map it to the most efficient flow.
Yeah, so much more we could get into today. Probably end up being a 3-hour call or presentation, but probably want to close things up here. Mark, is there anything else you want to share with the audience?
Well, I work with tons of different people, and it used to be, when I first started my business, I came out of the printing and the graphics industry, and I entered that industry with the perspective of mechanical engineering 50 years ago. And I recognized at that time that the print industry was going to go through a massive transformation of going from being master craftsmen and master printers, a master craft, which so many things were. The mechanics were master craftsmen, printers were master craftsmen, cabinet makers, furniture makers, they were master craftsmen. That was the mentality of the manufacturing world. And I could see that computers and technology were coming in, and that it was going to fundamentally change that industry. So I approached the industry as one that needed to have processes documented based on the laws of mathematics and physics and chemistry and engineering to move it forward. And so now that's what I've done in all areas. So I work with many, many different types of businesses, now service industries as well as manufacturing industries, to reimagine their business for the post-COVID world that we're living in today, especially driven by AI. As I mentioned earlier, we've had 7 years of experience in that space, and we're still getting better with it all the time. So that's all about what we're doing now. And we help businesses, typically businesses that are in the sub 25 million range, that can make quick adjustments and are in a position to be agile and serve the world today, as opposed to the factory that's in China that's making 10 million. Now they want a local factory in Spokane, Washington, or Ames, Iowa, that's adjacent to where the actual distribution or actual use is going to be used. So we're about to see a real renaissance, and what we're doing with Profit First and with the profitable manufacturing and how we look at it with AI, I think we're at a crazy pivotal time right now.
Yeah, and we're sharing right now with where you can find more about Mark and how to contact him if you have any questions or want to work with him as well.
Yeah, you can always find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Mark Coudray on LinkedIn, so it's super easy to find me there. I'm in social media and all areas as Mark Coudray. So Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever you want to go, it's Mark Coudray.
Great. Well, thanks again, Mark, for taking the time to chat with us and share your immense 5 decades of knowledge, I'd say. with everybody, and may probably have you on in the future at some point down the road as well.
I'd love to come back. We've got so much to talk about. There's so many opportunities here to move manufacturing into the next generation.
Great, thank you. And then for our guest next week will be Christy Barber. She'll be talking about systems and processes. I think this is a good follow-on to our discussion today of better information, better knowledge that we're making and using that information in the future. So again, we'll see you again next week, 9 a.m. Pacific time. And thanks again for watching.